Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm sharing 35 of my favorite patriotic DIYs that I've done so far here on my channel. Keep in mind that they are labeled a little bit out of order since this is a combination of several projects. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Now let's go ahead and get right into it. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be starting with some scrap pieces of wood. The bottom piece of wood is 7.5 inches, and then the three top pieces of wood are 6 inches. I actually ended up using 4 pieces of wood that were 6 inches long. For the 7.5 inch piece, I'm painting that with my folk art chalk paint in the color nautical, and then for 2 of the 6 inch pieces I'm painting those with my folk art chalk paint in the color Tuscan red, and then the 2 remaining 6 inch pieces I'm painting those with my Waverly chalk paint in the color ivory. Once the paint was all dry, I then wanted to distress all of the wood that I just painted, so I'm using some sandpaper and just sanding away the paint around the edges and then scuffing up the front of the pieces as well, and I did that for the blue and all of the red colored pieces. Then for the ivory colored pieces, I decided to take some Java colored chalk paint from Folk Art, and I'm just very lightly dry brushing that around all of the edges just to give this piece a rustic, distressed look. And I did end up taking some of that Java color around the edges of the red and blue piece of wood as well. I'm also going to be using one of these unfinished wood stars, and this one I'm painting with that same Tuscan red color, and then I'm using a smaller wood star, and for this one I'm painting it with the ivory color. Once the paint has dried on both stars, I'm then gluing the white star on top of the red star. Then I use some of that ivory color once again to dry brush around all of the outside edges of the red star, just to give it that same rustic vintage feel as the rest of the project. Then of course I had to use some more of that Java colored paint around the edges of the ivory color star just to make it stay with that rustic vintage feel. To add some detail to my stars, I'm adding some jute. I hot glued the end of the jute along the back side of the stars and then randomly wrapped the jute around the front of the stars and then just secured the end of the jute along the back side with some hot glue. I'm also going to be adding these wood letters to spell out USA, and I'm going to be painting all 3 of these letters with my nautical colored chalk paint from Folk Art, and you can get these wood letters at Hobby Lobby. Now it's time to start putting everything together. I'm using hot glue to attach the white and red wood pieces together, and I just switched by going white, red, white, red. Then I'm going to be taking all of those and just hot gluing them to the top blue piece right in the center. I thought it would be really cute to add some of this star ribbon from Hobby Lobby along the front of the bottom blue piece. So here I just wrapped it around the front, and then I'm securing the ends of the ribbon with some hot glue along the back side. And then once I have that attached, I thought it would be really cute to add some of this white trim from Hobby Lobby, and I attached it at the top of the star ribbon and then also at the bottom of the star ribbon. Next, it's time to attach my USA letters, and I'm just using hot glue to attach them on the second white wood piece, and I'm just placing them in the center, and then I'm also attaching my stars with the jute on the lower left-hand side. And here is the wooden patriotic hat all finished. This is the perfect tabletop piece, and it was super easy and affordable to create. Next is a DIY number 2, and for this one I'm going to be using this sign that I recently picked up from Hobby Lobby. It was part of their 75% off clearance signs, and I only paid $1.74 for it. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is just covering up all the words that were on the sign with my Waverly chalk paint in the color ivory. I am going to be leaving the frame the stained color because I really love that. And then I'm going to be using these wood letters that spell out America, and these ones are from Hobby Lobby. I'm going to be painting the A with my Tuscan red chalk paint from folk art, and then the next letter M, I'm going to be painting that with my nautical colored chalk paint. And then I'm just going to be switching between the red and the blue colored paint. I'm then going to be using hot glue to attach all of the letters right in the center of my sign. Here is the America tabletop piece all finished. It's such a simple and easy project that was super affordable, and it's the perfect tabletop piece to add to your patriotic decor this year. Now for DIY number 3, I'm going to be starting with these 3 unfinished wood spools, and these ones are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be using my folk art wood tin in the color walnut to stain all 3 of the wood spools. I'm also going to be using these 3 larger unfinished wood stars, and these are also from Hobby Lobby. The first star I'm painting with my nautical colored paint, the second star I'm painting with the ivory colored paint, and then the third star I'm painting with the Tuscan red colored paint. For my white colored star, I'm using some of my Java colored chalk paint, and I'm dry brushing it around all of the edges of the star to give it a rustic look. Then for my blue and red stars, I'm using some sandpaper to sand around all of the edges to make them look a little bit distressed. And then I'm also sanding on the front of the stars to scratch up the paint and make those look a little distressed as well. I'm also using 3 of these wooden dowels. The longest is 8 inches, and then the medium one is 5.5 inches, and then the smallest is 4.5 inches. And I'm using my folk art wood tin in walnut to stain all 3 of the wood dowels. I wanted to add some ribbon to all of my stars, so I'm going to be using this star ribbon and then also this lace ribbon. I cut them down to probably about 5 inches in the length, and then for the star ribbon, I am cutting both ends of it into a V shape, and then I'm also going to be using a longer, about 5-inch in length piece of jute that I'm going to be tying around the center of the lace and the star ribbon. Then to go in the center of all of the ribbons, I am going to be using 3 unfinished wood stars, and I'm painting the first one with the Waverly paint in ivory. The second star I'm painting with the Tuscan red color, and then the third star I'm painting with the nautical color from folk art. Next, I'm going to start attaching all of my ribbons. So for the red one, I just hot glued my ribbons right in the center, and then I hot glued my white star right in the center of the ribbons. For the white one, I again just hot glued those ribbons in the center, and then I hot glued the blue star in the center. And then for my large blue star, I did the same thing with the ribbons in the center with the red star on top. Next up, I am attaching the dowels inside of the spools, and to hold them into place, I just use some hot glue on the inside of the wood spool before I place the dowel inside, and I did that for all 3. Then for the last step, I just have to attach my stars to the dowels. For the medium size dowel that was 5.5, I attached the white star. The smallest 4.5-inch dowel, I did the blue star, and the largest 8-inch dowel, I put the red star on that one. And this is what the stars look like all finished. I love the rustic look of these, and they are perfect if you want to place them on a tiered tray separately, or you can put them together on a table like I did here. Next up is DIY number 4. For this one, I'm using a larger wood dowel that I picked up from Hobby Lobby, and I've already cut it down. The 2 longer pieces are 10.5 inches, and the shorter piece is 7.5 inches. One of the longer pieces I'm painting with my Tuscan red chalk paint. Then for the second longer 10.5-inch piece, I'm painting this one with my Waverly paint in ivory. And then the third small piece or dowel, I'm painting that with my nautical colored paint. Next, I'm creating a hole in the top center of all 3 of my dowels using my drill. And then I'm also going to be using some of this jewelry wire from my craft stash. To make it a little bit thicker, I just doubled it up and I cut them into pieces that were probably about 8 inches in length. And I did 3 different ones like this for the top of all 3 of my dowels. Then I'm just going to be wrapping those wire pieces around my fingers to make them into like little curly cues. And again, I did that for all 3 pieces of the jewelry wire. Then it was time to start putting everything together. So I used hot glue to attach the red and white dowels together. And then again, I used some more hot glue on the front of those to attach the blue dowel. And then I'm going to be using this star ribbon. I believe it's from Dollar Tree. And I'm just cutting it down to size, wrapping it around all of the dowels in the center, and then using some hot glue to secure the ribbon. Then I'm attaching the little jewelry wires inside of the holes at the top of the dowels. I'm using hot glue in the hole before I place the jewelry wire inside to make sure that it stays into place. And again, I did that on all 3 of the dowels. I then thought it would be really cute to add some stars on to the tops of the wires. So here I'm just painting 3 of these small unfinished wood stars. I did one with the Tuscan red, one with ivory, and one with the nautical color. Then I just used some hot glue to attach the stars on all of the tops of the jewelry wires. I did the white star on the blue dowel. I did the blue star on the red dowel and the red star on the white dowel. I also ended up adding a white piece of rope around the center of my star ribbon, and I think it just really added so much more detail. This is what the fireworks look like all finished. I love how these turned out, and they were really easy to create. Now moving into the 5th and final DIY for today, I'm going to be starting with this scrap piece of wood that I had in my craft stash, and I'm going to be painting it with my ivory colored chalk paint from Waverly. And then I'm also going to be using these Scrabble tile letter blocks to spell out the word America, but I wanted them to look a little bit more rustic, so I'm using my folk art wood tint in the color walnut to stain the tops of all of the tiles. Next, I'm using my drill to create 6 holes in the top of my wood piece. I'm using a drill bit that's about the same size as the wood that is on these little flags that I'm going to be using. And I did pick these flags up from Hobby Lobby. So for the flags, I left 4 of them their original length, and then for 2 of the flags, I did break them off so that they would be a little bit shorter once I placed them in the hole. So after I had the holes all drilled, I then hot glued my tile letters on the very front of my wood piece. And then I'm also going to be using some hot glue inside of all of the holes before I place my flags inside of them, just to make sure that they stay in there and they're nice and secure. As you can see, I did 3 of the flags facing the left side and then 3 of the flags facing the right side. And then with the shorter flags, I placed those in the 2 middle holes. Here is the piece all finished. I think this one would be perfect to place on a tiered tray or shelf. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be using 2 of these wooden crates from Dollar Tree. One of mine is broken, but I'm going to be putting that side of it on the back. The first thing I'm going to be doing is painting both of my crates with my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster, and I only had to do 1 coat of paint on these. Then once the paint was dry, I wanted them to have a rustic look, so I took some of my Java colored chalk paint from Folk Art and just dry brushed that around all of the edges of both of my crates. For this project, I'm also going to be using 3 pieces of scrap wood. 2 of them I have cut down to the same size, and those longer ones are going to go on each side of my crate. And then I also have a little bit shorter piece of wood, and that's going to go on the front. All of them I'm painting with that Waverly paint in the color plaster. And then once that was dry, I wanted all of these to match my crates. So I took that same Java colored paint and then just dry brushed that around all of the edges of all 3 of my pieces of wood. Next, I'm attaching both of my crates together. I'm just placing some hot glue on the top of one of the crates and then placing the second one on top of that to attach them. And then I'm also attaching the 2 longer pieces of scrap wood, and I did those right in the center on the sides of both sides of my crate. Once I have those attached, I'm then moving on to that 3rd piece of wood, and I am going to be using this firework stencil from Amazon, and I will have this linked down in my description box. I'm using just the bottom word on this stencil, and I'm getting it all in the center of my piece of wood, and then I'm using some painter's tape on each side of it to make sure that my stencil is secure and doesn't move around while I'm painting. Then for the paint color that I'm using, it is from Folk Art and it's in the color Nautical, and I'm using a Dollar Tree stencil brush to apply the paint. Then once the paint was all dry, I removed my stencil. I'm going to be adding a mini banner on the front of my crates. So to create that, I'm using this blue and red star ribbon from Joann Fabrics. I wanted them to have a V shape. So for 3 of the blue ones, I cut a V shape, and then 2 of the red ones, I did a V shape, and these are going to be my banner. So for the banner, I wanted to attach those pieces on this blue jute that I got from Dollar Tree. So I started by just creating a really small knot on one end of the jute, and then I hot glued that on the top left hand side of my crate. Then I just measured to see how I want my banner to be like swagged across the front. I cut that down to size and then made a knot on the other side of the jute and then hot glued that on the top right hand side of my crate. I then started attaching all of my little ribbon pieces. I went blue, red, blue, and I just attached those to that top jute piece along the front of the crate using some hot glue. I then wanted to add some detail to the wood piece that says fireworks, so I took some of that red and blue jute from Dollar Tree and I used 1 piece of each. I wrapped that around each side of the wood piece next to the word firework, and I just secured the ends of the jute along the back side of the wood piece. I'm now going to be creating 2 firework mini bundles, and for this I just took a dowel rod and cut it down into 6 different pieces that are all the same size. Then for 2 of the pieces I painted those with the Waverly paint in plaster. Then for 2 more of the pieces I painted those with my nautical color paint, and then for the 2 remaining pieces I painted those with my Tuscan red color from Folk Art. I'm then going to be putting my bundles together. So I took my red one and then I used some hot glue on the side of it to attach the blue color. And then I just used some hot glue on the front of those 2 pieces to attach my white piece. Then to add a little bit of detail to these, I used a piece of jute and I wrapped it right around the center of them. And then to make sure that that piece of jute stays nice and secure, I just tied a double knot. I did the exact same thing with the 3 remaining pieces to create a second bundle. I'm then using 2 of these unfinished wood stars from Dollar Tree and I'm painting them with my Tuscan red color. Then I wanted to attach them on each side of the word firework that I had stenciled on earlier. So I just used some hot glue to attach the stars over top of those jute pieces. Then I'm taking that piece of wood and I'm attaching it to the top of the 2 pieces of wood that I attached to my crate earlier on. And I just used some hot glue to do that. And then I wanted to start adding some little detail pieces. So I'm using one of these mini glass containers from Dollar Tree. And I just removed the cork since I'm not going to be needing it for this project. And then I took 2 of these little berry stems. I'm going to be using a white one and then a red one. I just cut them down really small and I thought these would kind of look like little red and white flowers. So once I have them cut down, I just place them inside of the glass container. Next, I'm going to be creating another little detail piece. I just took this small piece of a wood. This is from the scrap wood pack that you can get from Dollar Tree, and I painted it with the nautical color paint. Then once that was dry, I wanted to stencil on some numbers, and I'm going to be using the numbers on this stencil 7 and 5, so I just placed those over top of the piece of wood, and then I used the Waverly paint and plaster with a Dollar Tree stencil brush to stencil on the numbers 7 and 5 for 75. And then since the stencil pack does not have a cents symbol, I just freehand that with that same plaster color paint with a really small paintbrush. I then glued that piece on the right hand side right underneath the stars, and then I hot glued my little mini glass container on the top right hand side of my crate, and then I hot glued both of my little firework bundles on the left top hand side of my crate. And then for the very last detail, I did end up adding a small American flag on the left hand side. And this is what it looks like all finished. It was super easy to do and I think it turned out so cute. It goes perfect on a tiered tray or just sitting on a tabletop like I have here. Moving right along into DIY number 2, for this one I'm going to be using this round piece of wood that I got from, I believe, Michael's. And the first thing I'm going to be doing to it is painting the front and back side of this piece with the Waverly paint in the color Plaster. Then for the entire side of this piece, I'm going to be painting it with my Tuscan red chalk paint from Folk Art. Another piece I'm going to be using to create my design today is this stake. This one did come off of a Dollar Tree sign. It had been in my craft stash for a while and I thought it would be perfect for today's project. I'm painting that with that same Tuscan red chalk paint as well. Next, I'm using this stencil from Amazon. This one, it did come in the same pack of stencils from the one that I used in DIY number 1, and I'm just placing it in the center of my wood piece, and I'm using some painter's tape around all of the sides just to make sure that it's nice and secure while I'm painting. I'm also going to be using 2 different colored paints, so I'm just taking some painter's tape and I'm placing it over all of the stripes around the edges of where the stars are so that I don't mess up and get any paint where I don't want it to be. So for all of the stars on this piece, I'm painting them with my nautical colored paint from Folk Art, and I'm using a Dollar Tree stencil brush to apply the paint. Then once that was dry, I removed the painter's tape from the top over the stripes, and then I'm going to be taking some more painter's tape and placing those over where the stars are so that I don't get any of the red paint that I'm going to be using on where I just painted this blue paint. And then the red color that I'm using is Tuscan Red from Folk Art, and again, just using my Dollar Tree stencil brush to apply the paint. Then once the paint was all dry, I removed all of the painter's tape and the stencil, and then for the very last step in this project, I used some hot glue to attach the wood stake to my wood circle. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. It was a really simple and easy, affordable project, and I ended up just placing mine in one of my planters on my front porch. Next is DIY number 3. For this project, I'm using one of these signs from Dollar Tree. This one obviously is from back in the fall, but I'm finally using it today. The first thing I'm doing is just removing the middle part out of the frame because I will not be using it. And then I'm painting the entire frame with my Waverly chalk paint in Plaster. Then I'm just taking some pliers and I'm removing the beads and the staples from the back side of the frame. For this project, I'm also using 7 popsicle sticks that I picked up from Dollar Tree, and I'm painting all 7 of them with my nautical color chalk paint from Folk Art. And then once the paint has dried, I did want these to have a little bit of a rustic look, so I took some of my plaster color paint and I just very lightly dry brushed that color around all of the edges. Then it was time to cut down the popsicle sticks so that they would fit inside of the back of the frame. So I just measured those out and then took some scissors and cut off the ends of the popsicle sticks. Then once I had the first one cut down, I just used that as a guide to continue cutting down the remaining 6 sticks. I then used hot glue on the inside of the frame to attach all 7 of my popsicle sticks. Once those were all attached, I then wanted to add a little bit of distressing to the outside of the frame, so I took some of my Java colored paint and just very lightly dry brushed that, focusing mainly around the edges and the outside of the frame. Now I'm taking the beads that I originally had taken off in the beginning and I'm going to be painting these. But I thought it would be a lot easier if I were to just stick the bead on the end of an old paintbrush so that they would stay in place. And then I painted all of them with my Tuscan red paint. And then once the paint was on there, but while it was still wet, I took a piece of paper towel and wiped that paint off to give it more of a stained look. Now I'm stringing the beads onto 2 pieces of jute. Once I got the first bead strung on, I just made a knot on the end of the jute to hold it into place so that it doesn't fall off. And then in between each bead that I'm putting on, I'm making a knot. So I would do a bead, then make a knot, then do a bead, make a knot, and I continued that until I had all of my beads attached. I'm also using 9 of these unfinished wood stars, and these ones are from Michaels. I'm painting the tops of all of the stars with the plaster color paint. Then once the paint has dried, I'm placing them inside of my frame just to get them placed where I want them to be before I start attaching them. And to attach all of the stars, I'm using hot glue. Then for the very last step, I'm just attaching the beads, and I'm just using some hot glue on the back side of my frame to attach them. And here is the project all finished. Another super quick and easy project for the 4th of July. I ended up placing mine on one of my hangers on my front porch. Now for DIY number 4. For this one, I'm using 3 wood blocks from Hobby Lobby. 2 of them are a little bit taller than the 3rd one, and then I'm also using a small wood frame from Michaels. For the first wood block, I'm painting that with my nautical color chalk paint. Then once the paint was all dry, I'm using this stencil that has a bunch of stars on it, and I'm just placing the stencil over top of the wood piece and then just stenciling the stars using my Waverly paint and plaster on a Dollar Tree stencil brush. I moved that stencil around in different places on the entire block so that I would have stars on all of the sides of the blocks, and then I used some of that same plaster color to distress all of the sides of the block. Then for the second taller block, I'm painting that with my Tuscan red chalk paint. Then for this one, I did want to have stripes on it, so instead of using the painter's tape like I normally would, my painter's tape is a little bit thick, so the only other tape I had that was thinner is this heat tape, so that's what I'm going to be using for my project, but you can use pretty much any tape that's a little bit thinner or the size of stripes that you want to create. So I took my heat tape and I just placed it at the very top of my block and I wrapped it all the way around. And then once I had that on, I took a second piece of tape and I put it right underneath the first piece of tape. And then once I had the second piece on, I then put a third piece all the way around underneath the second piece of tape. And then I went back and removed the second piece of tape. So the second piece was really like a spacer, just so I would know exactly where to place my third piece. And then I continued to do that until I had stripes made on the entire block. Once I have all of my tape placed where I need it to be, I'm using the Waverly paint and plaster to paint in all of the spaces that do not have paint on them. Then once the paint has completely dried, I remove all of my tape. Then to give this block that distressed look that I like so much, I'm using that same Waverly paint and plaster to go around all of the edges of the block. Next is the third shorter block. This one I'm painting the entire block in the color plaster, and then to add a little bit of the rustic feel to this one, I'm using my Java colored paint and I just very lightly dry brush that around all of the edges of the block. Next, I'm going to be using some of this burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree. I'm just measuring it to fit over the front of my block, and then once I had the length all cut down to size, I then cut it a little bit shorter as well. And then I did want the edges to be frayed out so that they looked a little bit more rustic. I know I've said that a lot in this video, but I really do love that look. And then I just hot glued that ribbon right over top of the front of my block. Next, I'm going to be using these wood letters to spell out USA, and then I'm painting all of them. The U I painted in the Tuscan red color, the S I painted in plaster from Waverly, and then the A I painted in nautical. Then I'm just hot gluing all of the letters going vertically right onto the front of my block over top of the burlap ribbon. Next, I'm using this paper cord. I'm not really sure what this is called, but I did pick it up from Dollar Tree. I cut 3 pieces that were a couple inches in length, and then I'm just curling those up so that they look like the top of a firework, and then I'm hot gluing those on the tops of all 3 of my blocks. Now for the base piece on this project, I'm using this mini wooden plaque from Michaels, and to stain it, I'm using my Folk Art wood tint in the color walnut, and I'm just rubbing the wood tint on with an old rag. Then I'm going to piece everything together. I'm placing the two larger blocks in the back and then the smaller block right in the center. And I'm just hot gluing all of them onto the base that I stained. And this is what the project looks like all finished. Another really easy project that would be great to put on a tiered tray, shelf, or tabletop. Moving right along into DIY number 5. For this one, I'm using this unfinished wooden house, and this one is from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be painting the house with the folk art paint in the color Nautical. And then I'm also going to be using 3 of these mini wooden fences, and these are also from Hobby Lobby. I'm then going to be taking all of the posts apart. I tried painting them while they were still together, but it was really hard for me to get along the sides of the posts. So it's just easier for me to pop them apart. And then I'm going to be painting 8 of these mini wooden posts with the Tuscan red color from Folk Art. And then I'm going to be painting 7 of them with my Waverly paint in the color Plaster. Then for the straight wood pieces that go along the back to hold the fences together, those are also going to be in the Plaster color. After the paint was all dry, I then started piecing back together all of my fence posts, and each set of posts is 5, and I did rotate between the colors. I did red, white, red for all 3 sets. Then moving back over to my house, I'm going to be painting the rooftop of it with that same plaster color. Here you'll see me stenciling on this America word from this stencil. I do actually go back through and change it up a little bit, but I wanted you to see what I'm doing before I start the next step and you wonder why I skipped over steps. So next I'm going to be just hot gluing and attaching the fence posts on the bottom of my house underneath the word America. But like I said, I am going to be switching that out here in just a minute. So what I ended up doing was just painting over where I had stenciled on the word America with that same nautical color paint. And then I ended up using this stencil instead. It says United States of America. I'm obviously not using the bottom portion of the stencil, and I'm just getting the stencil exactly where I want it to be, and then I'm using some painter's tape on the top just to make sure it doesn't move around. And then I'm using that same Waverly paint and plaster to stencil on the words United States of America right above my fence post. Then to add a little bit more of the rustic feel to this, I used the Java colored paint and just really lightly dry brush that around all of the wording, around all of the fence posts, and then the roof of the house. For the last little detail, I'm using one of these wooden stars from Dollar Tree. I'm painting it with a Tuscan red color, and then I'm hot gluing that right on top of the roof underneath the chimney. And here's my house all finished. Again, another really easy patriotic decor piece that would be perfect to add to a tiered tray, tabletop, or shelf. Now for DIY number 6. For this one, I'm going to be using 3 long pieces of scrap wood. And then for these pieces, I'm going to be using my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. I used an old paintbrush to paint on the stain or wood tint, and then I used an old rag to wipe away the excess, and I did that for all 3 pieces of wood on the front, sides, and the back. I'm also using 7 of these unfinished wood stars. These ones I believe are from Michaels, and I'm painting all of the stars with my plaster color paint from Waverly. Then to use over top of those stars, I'm using these wood letters that spell out the word welcome, and these ones are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting all of the letters with the nautical color paint. Now it's time to start assembling everything together. I placed all of my 3 stained pieces of wood side by side, and then to place on the back, I'm using just some popsicle sticks. So I placed the hot glue on the popsicle sticks and then placed it on the back side of all of my stained pieces of wood. This is just going to ensure that all of the pieces of wood stay together. So I did just several of them along the back side. Then I'm taking my painted stars and I'm laying them out on the front of my wood pieces to get them all spaced like I want them to be before I start using my hot glue to attach them. Then on top of all of my wood stars, I'm going to be placing my painted letters to spell out the word welcome going down vertically. Now that I have all of my letters attached, I'm going to be creating my bow. For this, I'm using this Patriotic ribbon from Joann Fabrics, and I'm cutting 3 different sizes. So I did a small short side that was probably about 5 inches in length. Then I did a medium size that was probably about 7 or 8 inches. And then I did a third size that was probably about a foot in length. Then I'm taking all 3 pieces and I'm hot gluing the 2 ends of them together to form circles. And like I said, I did this for all 3 of the pieces that I just cut. I'm then stacking those pieces going from largest to smallest, and then I'm taking and just bunching those 3 pieces up in the middle, and I'm using this navy jute twine from Dollar Tree and just wrapping it around the center of the bow several times. I'm then tying a knot on the back to make sure that everything is nice and secure. Now I'm going to be creating my tail ends for my bow. I cut a piece of ribbon that was probably, I don't know, between 8 and 10 inches in length. I then folded it in half twice, and then I'm cutting upward to create a V on the bottom of my ribbon. I'm then just bunching it up in the center and then tying a piece of that same navy jute twine around the center to make sure that it stays nice and tight, and then hot gluing the bow in the center of the tail that I just created. I'm then attaching that bow at the top of my wood right above the W using some hot glue. Then for the very last step, I'm using some of my Java colored paint on a very small paintbrush, and I'm just very lightly dry brushing this around all of the edges of my star to give them more of that rustic farmhouse look. Here is my welcome patriotic sign all finished. I ended up placing mine on my front porch, of course, and I will be using it for this 4th of July. Next is DIY number 7. For this one, I'm using this windmill from Dollar Tree. It did have a couple attachments, I think, originally on it, but I have removed those. And the first thing I'm doing to the windmill is painting 2 of the blades with my folk art chalk paint in the color Nautical, and then I'm doing 2 of the blades in the Tuscan red color and 2 more of the blades in the Waverly paint in plaster. So I did 2 of the blue next to each other, and then I did a red, white, and then I did another red, white. Those ones were rotating. Then I'm going to be using this star stencil to place on the blades that are painted blue. So I just randomly placed these stars over top and just very quickly painted on some of these stars in the plaster colored paint. Then I'm using one of these wooden plaques from Michaels, and I'm painting the entire piece with that plaster color paint. I'm also going to be using this scrap piece of wood, and I'm painting this one with that same plaster color as well. Next, I'm using some hot glue on the inside of the plaque to attach my windmill. I just did a very, very generous amount of hot glue just to hold it into place, and I did hold the windmill in place until the hot glue fully set so that it didn't move around. I'm then adding my scrap piece of wood onto the front of my plaque. Next, I'm cutting a couple pieces of this burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree. I'm going to be having them placed inside of the plaque here, and I did have all of the ends of my ribbon all frayed out just to give it that more rustic look. I'm also going to be using some of these fireworks. These did come in a pack from Hobby Lobby. The ones that are painted blue with the white stripes, I'm going to be leaving those painted just like they are. But the ones that have the red stripes on them, I wanted the exact color red that I used on the windmill. So I'm painting over all of them with my plaster color paint. And then once that paint has dried, I'm going to be adding that Tuscan red, and I'm going to be just really messily and free-handed just painting on the stripes myself. And I did only a couple stripes, not as many as what they originally had, and this way they'll look a little bit more rustic and go with the theme that I want for this piece. I did not really like the sparkly tops that were on the fireworks originally, and I tried pulling them out, but they were in there really well. So I just cut them down as much as I possibly could, and then I'm using some more of this paper rope. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's from Dollar Tree. I cut really, really small pieces of it, and then I'm just hot gluing those right on the tops of all of my fireworks. I then took some of my Java colored paint and I'm dry brushing this along the base of this piece to give it more of that farmhouse rustic look. And then I also took that same Java color around all of the edges of the white pieces on my windmill. I'm using this America word cutout. This one did come in a pack of different like 4th of July themed words from Hobby Lobby. I'm just using some hot glue on the back side of the word, and then I'm attaching it to the very front of this piece. Then for the last step, I'm placing all of my painted fireworks inside. And here's the project all finished. Again, another easy, affordable project, and this one was super fun for me to create. Moving right along into DIY number 8. For this one, I'm using this unfinished wooden birdhouse, and this one is from Joann Fabrics. And I did not want to have the little hanger at the top, so I'm just pressing it back through the house, and then I'm using some pliers just to pull it out. And then I'm going to be using some of this blue and white star paper, and this is from Hobby Lobby. And I'm going to be using this on the roof of my house, so I'm just placing one side of the roof onto the back side of the paper and just tracing around, and then I am going to be cutting it out a little bit larger than what I had marked, just so that I give myself a little bit of extra room. So after I had the first piece cut, I'm then just taking that piece as a guide to cut a second piece. I'm then painting some Mod Podge right on the top roof of my house, and I'm just doing one side at a time. So I did this side first, so I just painted the Mod Podge on and then placed the paper over top of that and just made sure I pressed out any bubbles that were on here. And as you can see, the paper is a little bit longer than the roof of the house. I then just folded it over around all of the edges, and then I'm taking my sandpaper and just sanding around all of the edges to give that paper a nice clean cut. I'm then doing the exact same thing to the other side of the roof. I'm painting on the Mod Podge, placing my paper over top of that, and then sanding away the edges. Then I'm taking my nautical color chalk paint and painting that around all of the edges of the roof. Next, I'm using this block from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be doing the same thing with the star paper as I did with the roof. I'm just placing it over my paper and tracing around it, and I'm going to be cutting that out just a little bit larger than what I traced, and I did that for 4 different times to go around all sides of my block. Then I did the same thing. I just painted on the Mod Podge and then the different sides of the paper, and then I did just use some sandpaper to sand away all of the edges around the paper and just get a nice clean cut. I'm using these 2 square pieces of wood, and these I believe are either from Dollar Tree or Hobby Lobby. I'm not sure, but you can get them at any craft store. And I'm hot gluing 2 of them together, and this is going to be the base where I attach my house, and I just wanted it to be a little bit thicker. That's why I glued both of them together. And then I'm painting the entire thing with the Tuscan red paint. Then I'm using that same Tuscan red color to paint the rest of my birdhouse, and then I'm moving back to the base piece, and I'm going to be painting on white stripes, and for the color that I'm using, it is Waverly in Plaster, and I'm hand painting these on, and I want them to look really messy and rustic so that this birdhouse looks old. And so yeah, I just painted on a bunch of stripes, and then I moved back to the birdhouse, and I'm doing the same thing for that. I'm painting on stripes just kind of in random places. They don't have to be spaced out the exact same. Like I said, I wanted it to look really messy and rustic. I did leave the front of my house without any stripes, and I did paint around the edge of the door of the birdhouse and then the little stem that comes out, and then I dry brushed around all of the windows, and then I dry brushed around the roof and the edges of the house as well. Now that I have everything painted, it's time to start putting everything together. I just hot glued the base onto the block, and then I hot glued my birdhouse right in the center of my block. And here is my rustic patriotic birdhouse all finished. This one is another great project for a tiered tray, and it was super easy to do. Next up is DIY number 9. For this one, I'm using this 8-inch wire wreath form from Dollar Tree. They do come in a 2-pack, but I'm using just the one today. And then I'm using this Patriotic ribbon from Joann Fabrics, as well as this burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree. Then to secure all of my ribbon, I'm going to be using some of these little wires that I picked up in this tan color. First thing I'm doing is taking this Patriotic ribbon and I'm cutting a strip that's probably about 7 or 8 inches in length, and then I'm using that first piece as a guide to continue cutting several more pieces that same length. I'm using several of these pieces for my wreath, so I need a bunch of them cut out. Then once I have them all cut out, I'm then folding my ribbon in half once, and then I'm folding it again in half, going vertically, and then cutting upward in a diagonal from the bottom of the ribbon up to make my ribbon have a V shape. I'm then cutting strips of this burlap ribbon. These ones I'm going to be doing a little bit smaller. These ones were about 5 inches in length, and I cut several of these as well. And then once I had them all cut out, I did the same thing. I folded them in half horizontally and then again vertically, and then just cut from the very bottom of the ribbon going up to form that V shape on the bottom. Then I took my wires, and I did cut them in half before I started doing this, but I'm going to be wrapping them around the bottom and the middle wire. I did 3 around the middle wire and then 3 around the bottom wire as well, and I did like stagger them out a little bit. I'm then taking a strip of my Patriotic ribbon and I'm just bunching it into the center, and then I'm placing that in the center of my wire and then wrapping the wire around the center of my ribbon to secure it into place. I'm then taking a piece of the burlap ribbon, doing the same thing, bunching it in the center, only this time I'm placing it right in the center of where I have my Patriotic ribbon, and then just using those wires to secure that one in place as well. I then continued to do all of those same steps over and over again until I had my entire wreath covered with all of my wires and both of my ribbons. Then once all of my wreath is covered, I'm just taking those wires that are sticking out and I'm wrapping them and just tucking them on the back of my wreath so that you can't see them. And then I'm just going through and fixing my ribbon a little bit. Both ribbons do have wires in them, so it's really easy to form them just the way that you want. For a little detail on my wreath, I'm going to be adding this July 4th word cutout. This one did come from that pack of cutouts from Hobby Lobby, and the red color is nice, but I wanted it to pop a little bit more, so I'm painting the top of this with the plaster color chalk paint. And then I'm also going to be adding these 2 stars. These ones are also from Hobby Lobby, and I'm doing just the blue and white ones. So the first thing I'm doing is just using some hot glue to attach both the white and the blue stars, and then right underneath those stars I'm hot gluing my word cutout that says July 4th. And here is my wreath all finished. I love the colors all together on this wreath, and it was really easy to do. It only took me probably about 15 minutes to create it, so I'm really happy with how this one turned out. Now for the 10th and final DIY for today, I'm going to be using this wood shutter, and this one came from the Target dollar spot a while back. The first thing I'm going to be doing is using my plaster color paint, and I'm painting the second strip from the side that color, and then also the one on the end all the way to the right. Once I have those 2 strips painted, I'm then using my Tuscan red color and I'm painting the other 2 remaining strips. Then for the top pieces of wood, I'm painting those with the plaster color as well. Once all of that paint has dried, I wanted to add a really rustic look to this, so I'm taking some of my Java colored paint. on a really thin paintbrush, and I'm painting that in all of the cracks between the slats on this piece of wood. Now it got a little more like rustic-y than what I had originally planned, and I was just gonna scrap this, but I decided to just keep going and working with it to see if it could be something that I'd like, and I'm really glad I did. I'm also going to be using 3 different size wood stars for this. I'm going to be doing the largest star in the Tuscan red color. I'm doing the middle star in the plaster color, and then the smallest star I'm doing in the nautical color. I'm also going to be using this welcome word cutout. This one is from Joann Fabrics, and I'm painting it with the nautical color chalk paint. Next, I'm taking some burlap fabric and I'm cutting that down to where I can wrap the fabric going around the front of this piece, and then the bottom I want to have that wrap going or wrapping up behind the piece, if that makes sense. So I'm just using some hot glue to attach the fabric along the back side, and then for the bottom I did just fold the little pieces a little bit so that they looked a little bit nicer and more put together when you look at the piece from the front. I am going to be adding some greenery and flowers. I use these little white flowers from Hobby Lobby in so many of my projects because I just love them so much. So I just took some of them off of the stem and then I placed them inside of the burlap. And then I'm also using some eucalyptus stems, and these ones are from Hobby Lobby, and I just put those around all of the little white flowers. Then it was time to attach my welcome word. I used hot glue on the back side of that and just attached it at the very top of my sign. I'm then adding 2 pieces of this navy colored jute from Dollar Tree. I just cut 2 strips of it and then I'm wrapping it so that it goes around the front, and then I'm securing the ends of the jute on the back side of my sign using some hot glue. Before I add on my stars, I wanted to add a little bit more distressing to them. So for the white one, I used the Java colored paint and I dry brushed that all around the edges of the star, and then I used my plaster color on the Tuscan red one. I just dry brushed that color around the edges, and then I hot glued the red one on first, then the white one over top of that, and then the small blue one, I used that same plaster color to distress it and then attached it right in the center of my white star. And this is what my piece looks like all finished. I love how this one turned out. I'm so glad I did not scrap it and I kept going because it ended up turning out so much better than I envisioned. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be starting with these 2 round wood plaques. The smaller one is about 3 3/4, and then the larger one is 4 3/4. And I'm painting both of those with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. Then once that paint was dry, I did want to add a little bit of distressing, so I'm using some Java colored paint on a small brush and just very lightly painting this color around all of the edges and little grooves on both of the round wood plaques. I'm also going to be using this unfinished wood table leg, and I did pick this one up from Lowe's, and I'm using that same ivory colored paint and I'm painting the entire leg. Once the paint is all dry, I am going to be adding some distressing just like I did with the round wood plaques. I used that same Java color around all of the edges and high points on the leg, and I really just love how it made everything pop. I'm also going to be using 3 American flags. You can get these at pretty much any store this time of year. And I did want to have the poles on the flags look a little bit more rustic. So I'm using a small paintbrush to apply my walnut wood tint from Folk Art. I just painted it on and then I wiped away the excess. And again, I did that to all 3 poles. Next, I'm using my drill to create 3 holes in the bottom of my table legs. I did 1 kind of more forward in the center and then 2 further back on each side. And then this is just going to be where I place my American flags. Then I'm going to be hot gluing the 2 wood plaques together with the larger one on the bottom. And then I'm using some hot glue to attach my table leg right in the center of my wood round plaques. For the last step, I'm just going to be adding a little detail piece with this star ribbon from Joann Fabrics. I tied it around my table leg and then just created a really simple bow. Here is the project all finished. I love this one so much. I think it looks so high-end and beautiful. and it was really easy and affordable to create. Next is DIY number 2. For this one, I'm going to be using this square unfinished wood piece from Dollar Tree. And the first thing I'm doing is painting the entire frame of the piece with my nautical chalk paint from Folk Art. And I did paint the back of this piece as well. Then I'm going to be painting the inside of the frame with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. Next, I'm going to be using some of this small white rope from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be adding it around all of the outside edges around the frame, and I'm just using some hot glue to attach the rope. I just thought this would be such a cute little detail, and I love the way that it looks. For the inside of this piece, I'm going to be using this United States of America stencil from Amazon. I will have a link to it down in my description box in case you guys are interested. I'm just getting it centered and then using a piece of painter's tape to hold it into place. Then for the words United States of America, I am using my Tuscan red color from Folk Art. And then once that was dry, I did want to do the stripes on the side a different color. So I just used some painter's tape over the areas that I already painted so that I wouldn't get any of the opposite color over what I've already done. And then for the stripes, I'm using nautical also from Folk Art. And then I just continued with that same Tuscan red color for the 1776. Then once the paint was all dry, I removed the stencil, and you could leave it just like this, but I decided to add 2 stars. These are just unfinished stars I had in my stash, and I'm painting both of them with that same Tuscan red color. And then I'm going to be hot gluing both of the stars in the top corners of my sign. Here is the sign all finished. I think this one turned out super cute, and it is so easy to do and makes the perfect accent tabletop piece. Next up is DIY number 3. For this one, I'm going to be using this Welcome Autumn sign that I've had for a couple of years now from Michaels, and I don't ever use it anymore, and I figured I would just redo it. So I'm taking my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory, and I'm painting the entire piece. Then I'm going to be adding a little bit of distressing to the piece. I'm using my Java colored chalk paint on a smaller brush and then just very lightly painting around all of the edges. Then to go on the top of my piece, I'm going to be using the 1776 stencil from Amazon, and I will have a link to it down in my description box. I'm getting it centered onto my piece, and then I'm using a painter's tape around all 4 sides to hold it into place. I'm also going to be doing the outside like wreath stars that go around the larger star in the center a different color. So I'm using some painter's tape over those, and then I'm just going to be painting the middle star with the 1776 number with my Tuscan red chalk paint from Folk Art. Once that's painted and the paint has dried, I'm then going to remove the painter's tape from the stars that go around, and then I'm just going to be using that same tape to place over the red that I've already painted on. I always like to do this because if I don't, I always end up mixing the colors together and then having to go back and repaint. So the outside stars, I am going to be using the nautical color paint from Folk Art. And then once the paint has dried on everything, I'm just removing all of the painter's tape and the stencil. I did end up going back through and distressing the top of this piece with that same Java color, but while I was filming it, my camera died and it didn't get the full clip. So once I had that done, I'm then going to be moving on to these table legs. These ones were from a table that I had outside, and then the top part got kind of like gross and I had to throw it away, but the table legs were still in great shape. So here I'm just going to be freshening up the paint on them. I'm using my Waverly paint and Ivory to paint all 4 of the legs. And I do still want to have like the distressed look of kind of how they look now, but I just needed to freshen them up. So I'm going to be taking that Java color once again and going around all of the high points with this color. And then once the high points are painted, I did take a little bit of that Java color on a stencil brush, and I very lightly painted over the entire legs just to give them kind of like a really dirty rustic look, because personally that's the kind of patriotic decor that I love. For the last step, I'm going to be using some hot glue on the table legs to just glue them to the inside of the top piece to create my mini little table. This is what it looks like all finished. I think it would make a super cute little plant stand, and that's what I plan on doing with it. Moving on into DIY number 4, I'm going to be using one of these unfinished wood framed pieces from Hobby Lobby. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is just staining the entire frame piece. And I'm using my walnut wood tint from Folk Art to do that. I just used a paintbrush to apply the stain, and then I used a paper towel to wipe away the excess. Once that was all stained, I'm then going to be painting the inside of this piece with the Waverly chalk paint in ivory. For the inside, I'm going to be using yet another stencil. This American flag stencil is from Amazon, and I will have a link to it in my description box. It was a little bit too large to place in the center of my frame, so I did have to cut it down just a little bit, but it didn't do anything to the actual stencil design. It just made it a little bit smaller. So once it was smaller, I was able to place it in the center, and then I just used some painter's tape to hold it into place. I'm then using a small paintbrush with my nautical color paint and just filling in the line around all of the stars so that I know exactly where I need to be painting all of the blue paint. So here it now shows that I have a rectangle that I need to be painting blue, and I'm just using that same nautical color to fill in the rectangle. Once that has dried, I'm then going to be placing the stencil back over top of it, and then I'm just going to be using some tape once again to go around all of the edges of the star so that I don't get any paint where I don't need it to be. And then I'm using the Waverly paint in ivory to stencil on all of the stars. Then for all of the stripes, I'm using the Tuscan red color from Folk Art, and I'm using my Essential stencil brush to apply the paint. Once all of the paint has dried, I'm then removing all of the tape and the stencil. I thought it would be really cute to add this home wood word cutout. This one is from Joann Fabrics, and I'm going to be painting the home word with my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. And then once the paint has all dried, I'm going to be hot gluing it right in the center of my American flag. Here is the sign all finished. This one looks so high-end compared to how much it cost me to create this piece. It was only a few dollars, and I just love how it turned out. Next up is DIY number 5. For this one, I'm starting with this scrap piece of wood, and I'm going to be painting it with the Tuscan red colored paint. Then I'm also going to be using 3 pieces of wood shims that I had left over in my craft stash. I have cut them down a little bit. I have a larger piece, a like medium-sized piece, and then a smaller piece. As you can see here, I'm going to be creating the number 4 with the pieces. For the piece on the bottom, for like the line for the number 4, that one I'm painting with my ivory color paint from Waverly. Then the second largest piece I'm painting with my Tuscan red color from Folk Art, and then for the smallest piece I'm using the nautical color from Folk Art. I'm also going to be using these unfinished wood letters from Hobby Lobby to spell out the word July, and I'm painting each one of the letters with my ivory colored paint. I decided I wanted to add some stars onto the wood shim that's painted blue. So here I'm just placing one of the star stencils that I have in the center of the wood shim and then painting the stars that ivory color. This stencil did come in a pack with some of the other 4th of July stencils, and again, I'll have them all linked down in my description box. Next, I'm using some hot glue to attach the blue color shim on top of the white color shim, and then the red one onto the blue and white one to create a number 4. Then I'm going to be just placing all of my letters to spell out the word July on the right side of the red shim. Once I have them into place, I'm then just hot gluing each one of the letters back down. For the last step, I'm using hot glue to attach my number 4 to the base piece. And this is what it looks like all finished. It is the perfect tabletop or shelf decor piece, and I just think it is so cute and a little bit different than all of your other patriotic decor that you see out in stores. Next is DIY number 6. For this one, I'm going to be starting with this piece from Dollar Tree. I've already actually cut some of it off and used it for another project, but it's the perfect base piece. So here I'm just starting by painting the entire piece with my nautical colored paint. Then I'm going to be using 3 4x4 square pieces of unfinished wood, and I'm painting all 3 of these pieces with the Tuscan red chalk paint. Over top of the wood pieces, I'm going to be using stencils U, S, and A. These are Scrabble tile letter stencils, and they are from Amazon. I'm using some painter's tape to just hold the stencil into place around my wood piece, and then I'm using ivory colored paint to stencil on the U and the little number 1. And then I did the exact same thing for the second and third pieces of wood for S and A. I just secured the stencil with some painter's tape and used that same ivory color. After all of the paint was dry on all of my wood pieces, I'm then removing all of the painter's tape and the stencils. I did want to add a little bit of distressing to my bottom base piece. So here I'm just using a smaller paintbrush with that ivory color, and I'm just going around all of the edges to give it, again, more of that distressed look that I like. And then once that was painted, I decided I wanted to add some stars around the bottom as well. So here I'm using this star ribbon from Joann Fabrics, and I'm just hot gluing it around the wood piece and then just securing it with hot glue along the back side. And then once I had that on, I decided to add some of this this white cotton cord around the top and the bottom of the star ribbon. And again, just securing it into place with some hot glue along the back side. For the last step, I'm using hot glue along the bottom of each one of my wood tile pieces and then just placing it right in the center of my base piece. And I'm obviously spelling out U, S, and A. Here is the piece all finished. It's another easy and affordable piece for this 4th of July. Next, we have the 7th project in today's video, and I'm going to be using one of these unfinished wood trays from Dollar Tree. And the first thing I'm doing to the tray is painting the entire outside with that nautical color chalk paint. Once that paint has dried, I'm then going to be cutting down this 4th of July or Patriotic paper, and I believe this one is from Hobby Lobby or Joann Fabrics. So I just cut the paper down to size so that it will fit right in the center of my wood tray. I'm then putting some Mod Podge on the entire back side of my paper, and then I'm placing it right in the center of my wood tray and then just pushing out any bubbles that were in the paper. And then once that's dried down a little bit, I'm using that Mod Podge once again and just putting it over top of the paper and using it as a sealer. You could leave the tray as is, but of course I like to add distressing to everything, so I'm using some of my ivory paint on a small paintbrush and just very lightly painting that around all of the edges of my tray. This is what the mini tray looks like all finished. I think it is so cute, and I would love to do something like this to a larger tray as well. It was really affordable and only cost a few dollars. Next is DIY number 8. For this one, I'm going to be recreating the sign that I got from Dollar General. It was actually 50% off, so I only paid $2 for it. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is just wiggling and popping off the arrow that's in the center. And then it did leave obviously some like ripped paper in the middle, but I'm just going to be painting over that and re-gluing it on, so it was no big deal. I painted the inside of this framed piece with my ivory colored paint, and then I actually decided that I was just going to pop the piece out since it would be a lot easier to paint my frame without having the inside piece. So once I did that, I ended up painting the entire outside frame piece with my nautical colored paint. And then for the arrow, I did paint that with my Tuscan red colored paint, and I did have to do a few coats just to get the word all covered up. For this project, I'm using these unfinished wood letters from Hobby Lobby to spell out the word fireworks, and I'm painting each one of my letters with my ivory colored paint. I'm then just placing my letters onto my arrow to kind of get a feel for where I want them to be. Once I have them all set, I'm just going to be hot gluing each one of the letters back down. Before putting everything back together, I did end up distressing the back piece, and I'm just using my Java colored chalk paint on a stencil brush to do that. And I mainly did around the edges, and then I took whatever was left over on my brush and just very lightly painted over the top surface. I'm then using hot glue around the back side of my frame piece, and then just placing my back piece back into place. And then I'm using some hot glue once again to secure the arrow right in the center of the frame. Next, I'm going to be creating mini fireworks, and I'm using these dowels that I've already cut down, and I have 5 of them that I'm going to be using. They're 3/4 inch thick by 2 1/4 inch in length. I'm painting all 5 of them with my ivory colored paint. Then once the ivory colored paint is dry, I'm using a small paintbrush with my Tuscan red color to paint on stripes. The stripes are going to be a little bit distressed looking. I just think that they look really cute this way. So again, I did that to all 5 of the pieces. For the tops of the fireworks, I'm going to be using this paper cord from Dollar Tree. I'm not really sure what it's called, but I'm going to be cutting 5 of these pieces that are about 1 inch or 2 in length, and then once I have them cut, I'm going to be hot gluing each one of them on top of the fireworks. I'm then going to be using some hot glue to attach the fireworks to the very top of the sign. I did them kind of on a diagonal and then on top of each other as well for the left and right side. And then once I had those ones attached, I wanted to add one more right in the center. Here's the sign all finished. Another really easy, affordable project in today's video, and I am going to be using it on one of my end tables this year. Next up is a DIY number 9. For this one, I'm going to be using a scrap piece of wood that is 7 1/4 by 4 1/2. I'm painting the entire piece with my ivory colored paint. And then I'm going to be using the stripes from the American flag stencil that I used earlier on in the video. I'm just going to be placing the stencil onto my wood piece and just making sure it's centered nicely. And then I'm using my Tuscan red color to paint the stripes on my piece. Once everything is all dry, I'm going to be removing the stencil. I'm using another piece of scrap wood that is 5 1/2 by 2 inches, and I'm painting this piece with my nautical color paint. I'm also going to be using US and A unfinished wood letters. These ones I believe are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting all of them with the nautical colored paint. Once the paint is dry, I'm then just going to be seeing exactly where I want them to be on my wood piece, and then I'm going to be hot gluing each one of the letters down. For a little accent piece, I'm going to be using these 2 unfinished wood stars. One is a little bit smaller than the other one. The larger star, I'm using the Tuscan red color on it, and then on the smaller one, I'm painting that one with the ivory colored paint. I'm now going to be cutting a piece of jewelry wire and then just folding that in half and twisting the 2 pieces together. Then I'm going to be hot gluing the white star right on top of the red star, and then using more hot glue to attach that jewelry wire right to the back side of my stars. I'm then using hot glue on the bottom of my striped wood piece and attaching it to the center of the blue piece. And then I'm using hot glue along the top back side of my striped piece to attach my jewelry wire with my stars. Then I decided I wanted to add one more mini wood star, so here I just painted it with the nautical colored paint and then hot glued it right in the center of the other 2 stars. Here is the piece all finished. I did not realize it until I was editing it, but it looks very similar to one that I created in last week's video, but it is a little bit different, and it was super affordable, and I love how this one turned out. Next is the 10th and final project in today's video. I'm going to be using this mini little unfinished wood flower pot. I got it from a store called Dollar Treasure, and I'm just going to be painting the bottom portion of the pot with the Tuscan red colored paint, and then I'm going to be painting the top lip part of this flower pot with my nautical colored paint. I'm then using a smaller brush with my Waverly chalk paint in ivory, and I'm just painting on some really messy stripes along the bottom of the pot over top of the red color. I'm then using this small white rope and just tying it in a knot along the front side of my pot. And then I'm using a tiny bit of hot glue underneath the knot just to make sure that it stays in place and doesn't move around. I'm then adding a small piece of floral foam inside of the pot. To go inside of my pot, I'm going to be using these 3 unfinished wood stars. I'm painting one of them with the Tuscan red color, one of them ivory, and then the 3rd star with the nautical color. I then cut 3 pieces of jewelry wire and then folded them in half. I'm then going to be just twisting them up and then twisting them around my finger to create like a little curly Q. I'm then using some hot glue to attach the jewelry wire to the back of each one of my stars. I'm then placing the jewelry wire with the stars right inside of the floral foam. And then for the last finishing touch, I'm going to be using some hot glue right on the floral foam and then just attaching some of my Spanish moss from Dollar Tree inside of my pot. And this is the project all finished. I think it is so cute, and it is the perfect little piece to add to a tiered tray. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be making a star. And for my star, I'm using 5 of these paint sticks that I picked up from Lowe's. For 2 of the paint sticks, I'm using my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I'm only doing a 1 coat of this paint for both of these sticks. Then for 2 more of the paint sticks, I'm using my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Tuscan Red, and again, just 1 coat of that paint. Then for my 5th paint stick, I'm using the Folk Art chalk paint in the color Nautical, and again, just 1 coat. Once they were all dry, I then used some sandpaper to start distressing them. I wanted these to have a rustic look, so I just sanded all 5 of the sticks to where I thought that it looked nice and distressed, and again just did that to the blue, the red color, and then also both white. Then it was time to start assembling my star. I did the 2 white and the 2 red color ones first, and then I laid the blue color one across the top of my star. Once I had it all laid out the way I wanted it to be, I started hot gluing all of the sticks together where they touch. Next, I'm using some of these gold push pins that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. I'm going to be using 6 of them on my star. I'm doing 2 of them on the bottom of my star where the wood pieces come together. The first one I just pushed in, but then it was a lot easier for me to just use my hammer. And then I did 1 in the center, and then you'll see me do the top ones later on. But I am using this God Bless America stencil that I picked up from Amazon last year, and I'll try to have it linked down below if I can find it again this year. I'm just getting the stencil centered to where the word America is in the center of the blue stick, and then I'm using some painter's tape to hold that into place. As you can see, I'm only going to be using the word America, and I'm using my Waverly paint in the color Plaster with a Dollar Tree stencil brush. Once it was dry, I removed the stencil. Then I'm using the push pins in the 2 places that I had missed early on. For the last step in this project, I'm using a piece of jute to create my hanger for the back. I just created a loop and then hot glued that on the back side of my star. Here is my star all finished. It was super easy to make and budget friendly as well. So if you're looking for an easy, affordable project, this one would be perfect. And then for DIY number 2, for this one, I'm using an 8-inch wreath form from Dollar Tree, and then this red and white striped ribbon from Joann Fabrics. I'm taking that ribbon and I'm tying it in a knot around the outside wire of my wreath form, and I left the tail ends a couple inches long. Then I'm taking this burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree and I'm tying that in a knot on the outside wire of my wreath form right next to my red and white striped ribbon. Once I have both of those on, I'm just pushing them together closely, and then I can add my 3rd ribbon, which is this navy and star ribbon, also from Joann Fabrics, and I'm doing the same thing, just tying that in a knot right next to my burlap ribbon. And after I have those 3 ribbons on, I'm just rotating or switching up between all of my colored ribbon. I would do the striped, then the burlap, then the star, and I did that all the way around the outside wire of my wreath form. Next, I'm using this sign on a stake from Dollar Tree, but I knew that I just wanted to use the circle part of this sign and I did not need the stake, so I'm just breaking that off of the back and I am going to keep that for a future project. Then I'm painting the front of this sign with my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster, and I did 2 coats of this paint to get everything all covered up. Once that paint was all dry, I then took some of my Java colored chalk paint from Folk Art on one of my Dollar Tree stencil brushes, and I started dry brushing this color around all of the outside edges of my circle, and then I very lightly did that over the front of the circle as well. You guys know I love using stencils, so for this one I'm using this Let Freedom ring stencil I got from Amazon, and I will try to have it linked down in the description box. I'm centering it onto the front of my circle, and then I'm using some painter's tape at the top and bottom to hold it into place. I am using some painter's tape on the bottom of the word ring and then the top of the word let, because I am going to be doing all of my words a different color and I just didn't want to get paint in the areas I didn't want it to be. So for my word freedom, I am using my nautical colored chalk paint from Folk Art, and then I'm removing the painter's tape from the words that I had them all covered up, and then I'm going to be using that same tape over the word freedom so that I don't get any of my red color paint on where I just painted it blue. For my words let and ring, I'm using the Tuscan red color from Folk Art on both of those words. After the paint is all dry, I'm then removing the painter's tape and the stencil. Next, I am using some hot glue on the back side of my circle and then placing that in the center of my wreath form and just pressing that down so it attaches to the wires. Then I'm adding some of this nautical rope around the outside of the wood circle. To attach it, I'm using hot glue right on the wood and then just pressing that rope onto it. After I had it going all the way around the circle once, I decided to add a second strip of the rope. So I just attached the second rope right on top of my first rope, and again, just use hot glue to attach it. Then to add just a little bit more detail, I'm using some of this white cotton cord from Hobby Lobby, and I'm hot gluing it right in the center of where the 2 pieces of rope meet together, and I just thought that added some nice extra detail. Then I'm using one of these unfinished wood stars from Dollar Tree that came in the unassorted wood packs that they have there. I painted that with the nautical color paint, and then I just distressed it a little bit with my plaster color paint, and then attached that right on the front of my sign next to the word let. Here is my Let Freedom ring wreath all finished. I love how this one turned out. Again, super easy, and I ended up just placing mine on a wreath stand on my porch. Now for DIY number 3, I'm using 3 of these mini block cubes that came in a pack of cubes from Hobby Lobby. Then I'm going to be staining them with a wood wash tint, also from Hobby Lobby, and it is in the color Old Bronze, and I did that to all 3 of the cubes. Then I'm adding a little bit of my Waverly paint in the color Plaster around all of the edges of my cubes to give them a little bit of a rustic look. For this project, I'm also using mini wood letters. These ones are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm using the letters U, S, and A. And yes, I know the S is flipped the wrong way right there. For the letter U, I'm painting that with the Tuscan red color from Folk Art, and then for the S, I'm using that plaster color from Waverly, and then for the A, I'm using the nautical color from Folk Art. I'm also using 4 of these wood beads to help me paint them. I just placed them on a little wood pick, and then I painted each one of my beads with that Waverly paint in the color Plaster. Now I get to start assembling everything together. I'm using hot glue to attach my letter U onto the front of one of my blocks. I'm also attaching the letter S onto my second block, and then for my third block, I'm hot gluing my letter A onto the front of the block. Next, I'm stringing a piece of jute through one of my wood beads, and then once I have it all strung through, I'm tying a knot as close as I can to the side of the bead on each side. I'm then trimming off some of the jute, and then I'm hot gluing the knot that's on the side of the bead onto the side of my block with the U. Then I'm doing the same thing. I'm taking another piece of jute and stringing it through my second bead and doing knots on each side of the bead as close as I can. Then I'm just trimming off the excess jute, and then I'm going to be hot gluing the knot of the jute right onto the second side of my wood block with the letter U. Then I'm putting hot glue on my block with the letter S and attaching that to the bead that is attached to the letter U. I'm then stringing another bead onto another piece of jute and doing the same thing, making knots on each side of the wood bead, then trimming up the jute so it's just the knots in the bead, and then hot gluing the knots on the blocks with the S and the A so that they are attached together. To finish up this project, I have to add one more bead on the end of my letter A, so I'm just doing those same steps as I did before with the jute and the knots, and then hot gluing that bead right onto the other end of my A. Here are my mini USA blocks all finished. They are cute and rustic, and they are perfect placed on a tiered tray. And now for the fourth DIY today, I'm using 3 of these framed succulents from Dollar Tree, but I only wanted to use the frames of them. So what I'm doing is just taking out the succulents, and then I'm popping the back of these out. But they were really easy to pop out. I just pressed on the back and they just popped right out. And I am going to be keeping the backs of them and the succulents for future projects. I'm also going to be using these wood block letters that say USA from Michaels, and I'm also going to be using some craft paper. This flagged craft paper, I believe, is either from Hobby Lobby or Joann Fabrics, and I'm just using a pen to trace around my letter U, and then once I have it all traced out, I'm cutting it out. I should have traced it out on the front of the paper, but it ended up working out fine with me tracing it on the back of the paper. When I'm cutting the letter out, I am leaving a little bit of space around my lines so that I have a little bit of wiggle room to work with later on. Once I have it all cut out, then I'm placing some Mod Podge on the front of my letter U, then placing that flag paper right on top, pressing out any bubbles and letting it sit to dry for about 15 minutes. I'm doing the same thing with my letter S, only this time I'm using this star paper that I believe is from Joann Fabrics, and I'm cutting that out once I have it all traced. Again, just leaving a little bit of space between around my lines, using the Mod Podge to attach it, and then the same thing with the letter A, only I switched it back to the flag paper, and then to get out the center of my A, I used a little X-Acto knife from Dollar Tree. After I have all of my craft paper attached to my letters and the Mod Podge has dried, I'm then taking some sandpaper and I'm sanding around the outside of all of the letters to cut off any of the overlap of the paper and then to just give it a really nice, clean look. Now that my paper is all sanded around the edges, I'm painting around all of the outside of my letters. For my letter U, I'm using Tuscan Red from Folk Art, and then for my letter S, I'm using Plaster from Waverly, and then for my letter A, I'm using the Nautical Color from Folk Art. The last step in this project is to attach all of the letters to the frames. So I'm just placing hot glue on the bottom side of all of my letters. The first one I started with was the U, and then I placed it in the center of the bottom of my frame. And like I said, I did that to all 3 of the letters. And here are my framed USA block letters all finished. This was such an easy project, just like all of today's projects, and you could always hot glue or attach the frames together, but I chose to leave them all separate. For DIY number 4 today, I'm going to be using this USA sign from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to be using the back side of the sign for the front of my sign. And I first wanted to remove these stars to use for other projects, so I just heated them up with my hairdryer and then just popped the stars right off. Once I had them all off, then I flipped the sign over and started painting the backside with my Waverly paint in the color Plaster, and I did 2 coats of this paint. I'm also using this God Bless America stencil that you saw me use earlier, only this time I'm going to be using the entire stencil. So I'm placing it in the center of my sign, and then I'm using a little bit of painter's tape on the top and the bottom of the stencil to hold it into place. And then for the color that I'm using, it is the Folk Art chalk paint in the color Rich Black, and I used my Dollar Tree stencil brush to apply the paint. Once the paint was all dry, I then removed my painter's tape and the stencil. To give my piece a more rustic look, I used some of my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Java, and I dry brushed that color around all of the edges of my sign and then just a little bit on the front of the sign as well. For this project, I'm also using some of these unfinished wood stars, and I'm using 3 different sizes. For the largest star, I'm using my Tuscan red paint, and then for the medium-sized star, I'm using my plaster color chalk paint, and then for the smallest star, I'm using my nautical color chalk paint from Folk Art. Once all of the paint has dried on all of my stars, I wanted to give them more of a distressed look, so I'm using some 60 grit sandpaper to sand around all of the edges, and then just roughed each star up a little bit in the center as well to give them that nice distressed look that I like so much. Then I'm attaching all of my stars together using some hot glue on the back side, and I just went from largest to smallest. Then I'm taking my stars and I'm attaching them to the top left-hand corner of my sign where it's going to be hanging off of the sign just a little bit, and I attach that with some hot glue. I'm then cutting down this red and white striped ribbon from Joann Fabrics to the size that I want it to be, and I'm also going to be using some burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree, and I'm cutting that down to the size that I want it to be as well. And I'm going to be using the burlap ribbon on the very bottom of my sign underneath my bike. So I'm just using some hot glue to attach the ends of that ribbon along the back side of my sign. Then I'm attaching the red and white striped ribbon over top of the burlap, and I had cut that down just a little bit thinner than the burlap ribbon. And then I'm using a strip of this white cotton cord from Hobby Lobby right over top of the striped ribbon, and I just hot glued those ends along the back side of the sign. To add some more detail, I'm using some of this white and blue string from Dollar Tree, and I doubled it up about 4 strands, I think, and I made a really simple bow, and then I'm hot gluing that bow right in the center of my blue star. I'm then using some nautical rope from Dollar Tree, and I'm stringing it through that top hole of my sign and then just tying a knot, and I thought that added some really pretty detail. And then I wanted to add a little bit of blue to the bottom of the sign, so I'm using that same blue and white string from Dollar Tree and about 3 or 4 strands thickness, and I'm just putting that right over that white cotton cord and using some hot glue on the back side to attach it, just like I did with the other ribbon and cotton cord. So I did that on the top of the white cotton cord, and then I'm also adding the same amount on the bottom of the cotton cord as well. Here is my God Bless America sign all finished. I really love how this one turned out and how all of the little details really came together. For DIY number 6, this one is super easy. I'm using an 8x10 canvas from Dollar Tree, and I'm using one of the Dollar Tree little knives here to take the canvas off of the frame. These actually don't work that great, so I would recommend using a really sharp utility knife instead of one of these little knives, or you can just cut or tear off the canvas if you don't feel comfortable using a blade. So once I have that canvas all removed off of the frame, I'm then taking some of these large like popsicle sticks that I got from Walmart, and I'm just spacing them out to see how many I need to use. I ended up using 6 of them, and I'm staining all of them with my Craftsmart wood stain in the color brown, and I just used an old towel to apply the stain. Then I'm painting my wood frame with that Waverly paint in the color Plaster. I did 1 coat of this paint, and I painted the entire frame. I painted the outside and then the inside part of the frame as well, because you will be able to see that. Then I started using some hot glue on the back side of my frame to hot glue all of my popsicle sticks, and I am doing it so the stained side you can see from the front. For the last step in this project, I'm attaching this Home of the Brave silhouette that is shaped like the United States. This I got from Hobby Lobby. It was $2.99 and I got it half off. I'm just placing some hot glue on the back side and attaching it to the center of my popsicle sticks. Here is my picture all finished. This is probably the easiest project in today's video, and I just really love the simplicity of it. Moving right along into DIY number 7, I'm using one of these hexagon shaped unfinished wood pieces from Michaels, and then I'm also using one of these mini candlesticks, and this did come in a pack of candlesticks from Hobby Lobby. And then I'm starting by painting the candlestick with that plaster color chalk paint, and I only did 1 coat of this paint. Then I painted my hexagon wood piece with that same plaster color chalk paint, and I painted the entire piece this color, and I did 1 coat of this paint as well. For this one, I'm using this stencil from Amazon. It did come in that same pack of stencils that I've been using today, and I did need to trim it down a little bit so that it would fit on the inside of my hexagon, so I'm just using my scissors to trim the stencil down. Once I had it all trimmed, I could just place it right in the center of my hexagon, and I didn't have to use any tape to hold it down. Then for all of the lines for my number 4, I'm using my Tuscan red chalk paint from Folk Art and just a really small paintbrush. And then once that was painted, I let that dry because I'm going to be using a blue color for the stars. And I did use a little bit of painter's tape over that, the lines for my 4, so that I didn't get any of the blue on the red that I just painted. And I'm using the nautical color from Folk Art, and it is a chalk paint, and I'm using a small paintbrush to paint that on. Once the paint was all dry, I then removed my stencil. To give this piece that rustic feel like the rest of the project in today's video, I'm using my Java colored chalk paint, and I'm just really lightly dry brushing this color on, again, to give me that rustic look that I love so much, and I'm doing the same thing to my candlestick. To finish this project up, I'm placing hot glue on the top of my candlestick and placing it in the center bottom part of my hexagon. This is my little pedestal sign all finished. I think it turned out super cute, and I just love it so much, and it was super easy to create. Now for DIY number 8. For this one, I'm just using this little unfinished wood sign. I believe this one is from Michaels, and then I'm using this red and white striped craft paper from Hobby Lobby. I'm just taking a pencil and very lightly going around the shape of the sign so I know where to cut my paper out. Once I have that all traced out, I'm then cutting my paper down to size. For my paper, I'm going to be attaching it to the top of my, or the front of my sign with some Mod Podge. So I'm just painting that Mod Podge onto my wood and then placing the paper on the Mod Podge, and then just making sure I press out any bubbles, and I'm letting that sit for about 15 minutes to dry. Once the Mod Podge is all dry, I'm then using some sandpaper to sand any of the paper that is overlapping the edges of my sign, and this is just going to give it a really nice clean look. I'm then painting all of the edges and then the base of this sign with that plaster color chalk paint, and I only had to do 1 coat of the paint. Next, I'm cutting down a piece of this burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree. I wanted it to go around just the top right corner of my sign, so I'm cutting it kind of in like a triangle shape, and then I'm hot gluing that to the top right corner of my sign. For the front of my sign, I wanted it to say 4th of July, so I'm using these unfinished wood number and letters, and I'm painting all of them with the Folk Art chalk paint in the color Nautical. Then once the paint was all dry, I started placing all of my letters and my number like in the front of my sign to see where exactly I wanted them to be before I started to hot glue each one of them down. I'm using 3 of these wood stars from Hobby Lobby. These did come in a pack of stars, and I'm just using 3 of them today. I'm painting 2 of them with the Tuscan red color from Folk Art, and 1 of them I painted with the plaster color. I'm then hot gluing all 3 of the stars above the words 4th of July, and I did the 2 red on the outside. I'm not really sure why I didn't do red, white, and blue, but I didn't. Then I'm using a piece of this white cotton cord. I cut it down to size so that it will fit across the very top of my sign, and I used hot glue to attach it. And then I did a second piece of cotton cord going along the bottom of my sign, and again, used the hot glue to attach it. To give this piece a little bit more of a rustic feel, I dry brushed the plaster color over top of the blue and the red wood pieces, and then my white piece, I just used a little bit of Java chalk paint. This is the sign all finished. It was super easy, again, like all of the other ones, and it is the perfect tabletop piece, or you could even use it on a tiered tray. Now for DIY number 9. For this one, I'm using one of these mini apple or fruit baskets. This one was from Joann Fabrics. It was $4.99 and I got it half off of that. I'm starting by painting all of the inside pieces with that plaster color from Waverly. I only had to do 1 coat of paint, and I did, again, all of the inside pieces of the strips of wood. Next, I am painting all of the outside wood striped pieces with my Tuscan red chalk paint from Folk Art, and only had to do 1 coat of paint for all of those. I also painted the bottom of my basket with that same Tuscan red color. For the top of my basket, I painted that with the nautical color from Folk Art. I painted a little bit of it and thought, oh, I should probably paint the top handle of the basket first, since it is like a white color, and if I needed to repaint it, it would be easier to do than with the blue. So I just stopped painting it, and then I painted the handle with the plaster color paint, and then I continued to paint the nautical top portion of the basket. Once it was all painted and dry, I then used that Java colored paint, and I just really lightly painted this over top of the entire basket, again, to give it that rustic kind of feel that is with today's theme. And then I took my Dollar Tree stencil brush with a little bit of the plaster color paint, and I went over top of the blue color and then the Tuscan red color as well. To fill my basket, I'm using some leftover burlap fabric that I had in my craft stash. So I just placed that into the basket, and then I'm using some red and white red and white berries from Hobby Lobby. These were $3.99 and I paid half off for them. I just placed them in my basket, and then to go around those berries, I used some of my boxwood stems from Walmart. Here is my mini basket all finished. It is super simple and a great accent piece to add to your decor for the 4th of July. For the final DIY today, I'm using one of these mini crates from Dollar Tree, and I'm also using 2 of the unfinished wood stars from the assorted wood pack from Dollar Tree. I'm starting this one by painting the middle slat of my crate with a plaster color paint, and I did this on both sides of the crate. Then once that was dry, I painted the top and the bottom slats of the crate with that Tuscan red paint, and I only did 1 coat on all of the slats. I painted the bottom of the crate as well with that same Tuscan red color. For the sides of the crate, I painted them with the nautical color chalk paint from Folk Art that I've mentioned a million times in today's video, and I did both sides of the crate on the ends. Once the paint was all dry, I took that Java colored paint and I just lightly painted that color over top of the entire crate to give it that rustic look to match the rest of today's DIYs. And then I also took some of the plaster color and dry brushed that over the 2 blue ends. Then I took some of this white cotton cord and I attached it to the inside of the crate around the handle, and I strung it around and through the handle 4 times just to add a little bit of a detail to this crate. After I had it all strung through, I then cut the cotton cord and hot glued the end of it down on the inside of the crate. I then added some Spanish moss from Dollar Tree on the inside of the crate with some of these boxwood stems from Walmart, and then I added some of these little white flowers from Hobby Lobby. This is my crate all finished. It's a super simple again, and just is a perfect accent piece for your 4th of July decor. And that wraps it up for all 35 of today's projects. I hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, I hope that you will consider subscribing. Please be sure to hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any future videos. Thank you so much for watching.